When I started in this business, there was no fault codes, there was no computers. There was just an engine with a mechanical fuel system, and we didn't have any troubleshooting manuals or anything else. We just had to go in and learn how to figure out problems. And when you started in a shop, anyway, the shop I was in at Cummins, there was guys there that were really good at figuring out what was wrong with engines. And the one good thing about working there was at the time back in the day, we're talking about in the 70s, if a truck came in and you're the next guy to go on it, you went on it. And it didn't matter if you had to troubleshoot it or do whatever, it was your job. And that because they did that, everybody there learned very thoroughly, if they wanted to, how to take care of problems and fix them and figure out what they were. And then, of course, we could call engineering in if we had to, but that was far and few between because we had a good group of guys. Now, I opened like that because it leads up to where we are with this video. And so we had an engine that logged some faults, and it came in, and the fault codes, of course, help you to figure out what's wrong, right? And they always point you to the right thing, right? And so in this case, a lot of the education that I got back in the 70s, and I call that learn while you burn, because the boss is on your back about why isn't it done yet? So he's burning on you, and you're learning as you go along about, oh, this happens when this happens, and oh, if I do this, this happens. And when I see this, I should suspect this, and on we go, right? So let's take a look and see what this was all about. So this unit came in with an active fault, and the active fault was 4726, engine fuel leakage. Now it's talking about the high pressure common rail because it has no idea what the low pressure side is. It doesn't measure it. And it says the data is valid, but above normal operating range, moderately severe. Now, when you read that description, what you think is that they are saying that the fuel pressure was higher than it should have been, or much higher than it should have been, because it's moderately severe. But remember, we're talking about fuel leakage, which is loss. So let's jump to what the fault description says, and that will clarify what we're actually talking about before we start discussing it. So here's a description of our fault. We've got fault code 4726, fault description at the top, engine fuel leakage, data valid but above normal operating range, moderately severe. And then down in the middle on top, it says fuel rail pressure decay has been detected. Well, decay is something that's less. It's not building, it's becoming less. And what effect does that have? To the right of that, it says the engine may run rough, may stop running, may not start, or may be difficult to start. So that supports the idea of low fuel pressure versus high fuel pressure. And then on the bottom, conditions for setting the fault. Possible causes of the fault include leaking fuel injectors or connectors. And we know if they leak, we have fuel pressure which is too low. The engine has trouble maintaining it. Or a leaking fuel rail pressure relief valve. And we know that the pressure relief valve is on the end of the rail, and if it opens when it shouldn't, it dumps the rail pressure and it's too low. Now, in the center, you see where I have Y and all the question marks. It says, see the green arrow, fuel rail pressure commanded, and the red arrow on the bottom is fuel rail pressure measured. I just used two different colored arrows for clarification. There's no significance of the color there. But commanded, let's look in the middle where it says first occurrence. Commanded was 15,646 pounds. So the ECM is saying, I want you to maintain 15,000 pounds in a rail. Look underneath. What do we actually have? We have 23,000. We're way above the pressure we should. So we're not decaying, we are building. Look at the last occurrence, because remember, faults do two snapshots, first and last. If there's 1,000 faults, the first one you're looking at is number 1, and the last one you're looking at is the number 1,000, or whatever the last number is, last occurrence. And in the last occurrence, same problem. We're commanding 18,000, but we're measuring 24, so we're not decaying. Now, in the center where it says conditions for setting the fault codes, right under that it says the engine control module detected the engine fuel rail pressure decayed or dropped more than expected during a motoring condition. It's important to understand when Cummins uses the word motoring, that's coasting. So the wheels are pushing the engine. Let's say the guy goes over a hill, he's got a stick shift. He goes over the hill at 65, the engine's running at 1700 RPM, and he goes down the hill and the freight is pushing him. He's got his foot completely off the gas, and that's motoring. All the way down to the bottom of the hill is motoring. And you should maintain your fuel pressure that's commanded. So if it commands 15, you should be measuring 15. If it commands 18, you should be measuring 18. So this is a contradiction because the numbers are higher. So what was going on here? Well, we're going to take a look at that, and I'll explain to you what was happening. So you think about it, stop the video, think about it, and then restart it and see if you were on track. Here again is a close-up of our fault snapshot, and at the top you can see this was an L9 2350, and that's a mid-range engine, but it's common rail. And the problem with this engine was that the fuel actuator solenoid was having a mechanical failure in the part of the solenoid that meters the fuel for the pump head. So electrically, the ECM had that where it knew it needed to be, but mechanically it wasn't always. And there was actually times when the fuel pressure would be decaying, but other times when it was above. So the fuel pressure when they were motoring or coasting was almost like a sine wave. It was low and high and low and high and low and high. And so I think what happened is it dipped low enough to log the fault. In other words, if we were commanding 15, we only had maybe 12,000. But then that mechanical failure immediately drove the fuel pressure right back up, way over correcting. And remember, while the engine's coasting, even though it's motoring and the fuel pressure is stable, the ECM is still trying to control it. So if it sees the fuel pressure start to decay or drop, it's going to power the solenoid, or actually it's going to cut the pulse width down to the solenoid so that it starts to close. Because remember, when the fuel actuator closes all the way, that's when we make full rail pressure. When it's open all the way, we make no rail pressure. So that was having a mechanical failure, and the ECM was modulating it, trying to control the pressure, and the snapshots just grabbed actually the overpressure. So I think it was just a timing thing, I don't know. But anyway, we changed that actuator, and this problem went away. So we did do a couple quick flow checks, and on the injectors, we did a flow check on all 6, and we did a flow check on the pump head, return flow, and those were in what we felt was normal specs, and they were normal according to the service manual. And so after that, we decided to pop an actuator in it, and that fixed it. So it was old school that brought us home on this one. Thanks for joining me on Engine Shop Joe.